Hello, everybody, and welcome to our conference, Living and Working in the US. Today, we have a fantastic panel of 3 talented alumni and 1 brilliant student that will explain how they arrived to the US, most importantly, how they obtained a visa for the US, and most interesting, what do they think of living and working in the US? This webinar is part of a series organized by Sciences Po Alumni every time in a different country. We were in Belgium last time and we will go to Senegal beginning of March. So don't hesitate to follow our activities on Sciences Po Alumni website. In the first part, we will have a few rounds with the panelists. They will present themselves in the US, how they arrived there, and what are their personal views on living and working in the US. And in the second part of our webinar, we will have an interactive session with Q&A. So don't hesitate to open your camera to make it more cozy, more friendly, our webinar. And if you have precise questions, you can, of course, use the chat. Don't hesitate to ask questions. So to begin with, we will start with Domitille Marchal Lemoine, who graduated in 1997, and he's executive director of Friends of Fondation de France, and she lives in New York City. So Domitille, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Camilla. Nice to meet you all. Camilla said a lot already about me. So I graduated from Sciences Po in 1997. At this time, we had a section, so it was a section service public. Then I studied at Dauphine in international business, and I had a career in France and the United Kingdom before relocating to New York in 2014 because my husband was professionally relocated in New York. So we moved here in 2014, and I worked as a consultant first. So I had my own structure, and I worked as a consultant, and then I joined a friend of Fondation de France as an executive director.
Thank you, Domitille. Our next panelist is Toma Konig. He graduated from the bachelor in 2011, and he's now working at Nextwell as project finance investment analyst. Toma, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Thomas. I joined Sciences Po in 2008, right after high school. I did 3 years there. It was the first year that Sciences Po opened up a 3-year bachelor program on top of its longer 5-year master program. So I did 2 years on the Paris campus, and then I went to the University of Florida as part of my 3rd-year exchange program. Really fell in love with the US and decided to not go back to Sciences Po to get a master's. I went instead to Bocconi University as a first step. I went there for a master's program. I just did 1 year, didn't finish it, and transferred to Columbia University in New York the year after. So that's how I got introduced to the US and then came back. And after graduating with a master's from Columbia University, I stayed 3 years in New York, worked on Wall Street at a couple of different banks. And then it's been 5 years now that I'm in Miami. I worked at Burger King, headquartered here in Miami. And now I'm doing project finance in renewable energy here in Miami still. So that's a little bit about me and my background.
Thank you, Thomas. So we started in New York, we went south to Miami, and now we come back to New York, where there is Nora. And Nora as well graduated in 2011. She's a journalist, documentary filmmaker, writer, and impact producer. So I think she would have a lot of things to say about her work. And Nora, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. So I currently have a, oh, I think somebody's not on. Stephen, you're not on mute. Thank you, Stephen. So yeah, the joy of Zoom. I'm currently on a green card, but I started with a J1 in 2011. I graduated and went straight to an internship in San Francisco right after graduating Sciences Po. And I had a J1 for a couple of years, which then I lost it because my visa expired, and then I got an O1, which then turned into a green card. And we can go into the why and how. And I am, yeah, a journalist and a documentary filmmaker.
Excellent, thank you, Nora. And now we will move to Paris, actually, where Loyal is based. He's a M2 student at PSIA, and he will tell us about his experience as an intern in DC. Loyal.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Loyal. I'm originally from Canada. Before doing my studies, I worked in the Canadian oil field in various positions, and then I moved to Brussels and lived in Belgium for 3 years studying my undergrad at the Free University of Brussels. And then I found PSIA, they have a program in international energy, and I thought it was the perfect fit. So I've been in Paris now for 2 years, and I originally looked at the US because it had a lot of really good opportunities. I just thought that there was DC has so many things that you can apply for and so many great opportunities, especially if you're like a current graduate student or a coming graduate student. There's just so many things to do there. So I applied to the Rosenthal Fellowship through PSIA. PSIA specifically has a fellowship available for it, and I got nominated. And then I ended up doing a fellowship posting with Congress on the House Select Committee of climate crisis. Yeah, climate crisis, climate change, same thing. But yeah, and it was an amazing experience. And I think in the end of the day, I only got it because of Sciences Po and because Sciences Po's amazing connections. So I mean, like it's a great experience overall. But I went through the J1 as well. So yeah, it's a bit, I know what it's like as well.
Thank you, Lloyd. Yes, now maybe we will have to try to compare or to have a quick knowledge about visa, because you had different visa, and so maybe you have some tips to offer to the audience how to get visa, which visa is more suitable, and how the procedure worked for you, and how did they have an impact on your biography, etc. So maybe we will start with Domitille.
Yes. So yes, my case is a little bit special because it was my husband who was relocated. So he was relocated under L1 visa, which is an intra-company transfer. And so I was eligible to get L2 visa, which is a derivative, of the L1. So with the L2 visa, you are allowed to work, but you need to ask for an employment authorization, which works for 2 years. And then you have to renew it every 2 years. Even if it's not the length of the visa, you had to ask for it. So this changed in November last year. But the new rules are not completely clear right now. So, but apparently now, well, they've not said yet how they will enforce the new rules. But now when you're with a L2 visa, you're allowed to work from day one when you arrive, and as long as your visa is valid. So it's very different from what I've lived and encountered, because yes, I had many periods, and I was lucky that I was a consultant by then, but I had many periods of time when I was not allowed to work because it took too much time to renew the visa. You're only allowed to ask for renewal 6 months before it expires. And usually it takes between 4 and 8 to 9 months. So many times I could not work for 3 months, 2 months, 4 months, depending on the periods, and I was not allowed to work at all. So that's a big issue. And but well, now I have a green card, so I don't have any issue with that anymore. But it's really something to consider. And my advice would be to come with a visa, and even if you're coming with your husband or with your spouse, to try and get your own visa and not to be dependent, because for many companies as well, they're reluctant to hire someone who's with a derivative visa and not a visa. So if you can plan your move early enough, I would recommend that you look for a job before you move and try to get sponsored and get your own paperwork and your own visa.
Thank you for this very useful advice, Domitille. So what did you do when you were not allowed to work? You could not even work for France or for other...
No, and in the United States, you're not kidding with the rules. So if you're not allowed to work, you're not working. So I had to take a break. So sometimes I did a lot of work for charities, for non-profit organizations and so on. So sometimes I did work without being paid, because it's something that you're allowed to do. So I could work, but just I didn't earn anything, which is not always the best way to work. And sometimes I just had to pause for a while and then resume my activities. But it's not very easy.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get a green card from the L2 visa? Was it difficult? Was it long?
Yes, it took 2 years.
2 years. Okay.
Yeah. And with the COVID, it was longer than so yeah, it was not. It was a long a long thing.
Thank you, Domitille. Thomas, what about your visa experience? Tell us more.
Yeah, so I'm gonna tell you about a very different experience that I had because I'm on a H-1B visa now, and in the process for the green card. I would say that the immigration process in the US is very confusing, it's difficult to navigate. It can be costly for you or for your employer. It's extremely time consuming for you or the lawyers that work for your employer. And for me personally, as the recipient of a visa, it's stressful. You're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. It's very energy intensive, the back and forth between the administration, your company, etc. And so really you have the feeling for a certain period of time that you're a second-class citizen. I'd say until you get your social security number. And even after that step, you are still going to face a lot of hurdles, and they really make it difficult for you to really feel at home and that your status in the US is well established. I came to the US, as I said, for the second time to complete my master's at Columbia University. This is done under an F1 visa. It's different from J1. There is a lot of letters and acronyms, but F1 is for a degree that you will complete, whereas I believe J1 is either for an exchange program. So that was my case when I was at the University of Florida for a year. I was under a J1, or for an internship. So in the case of an F1 visa, when you graduate with a degree from the US, the good thing about it, and actually the door I would recommend to anyone trying to come to the US, is that it allows you to stay after graduation for a period of 1 year, up to 3 years, if you are graduating in scientific and technology field, but otherwise 1 year. And this is something that is not available for a lot of the other visa types. And it's extremely useful. it allows you to find a job. And once you're on the job, ask for your employer to establish a more permanent status for you in the US. In my case, it's an H-1B, which is technical skills based type of visa. It is valid for 6 years in 3-year, 2 times 3-year increment. And you are not tied to an employer with such a visa, which can be a problem on other visa. Domitille mentioned L1, and I know that you're tied to your employer. You cannot switch companies. To continue on L1 just a little bit, it's unlimited in time, whereas H1B, it's limited to 6 years, but you can change. So pick your battles. Nothing is perfect. So I'm actually in my 7th year of H1B visa. I said it was limited to 6, but I started 2 years ago the process for the green card, and as the green card is pending, they will extend your H1B beyond the 6 years allowance that they give you. The green card process can only be started by your employer, or if you get married. Those are usually the 2 ways you get the green card. Your employer is sponsoring you, or you get married. There's other ways to get it. I'll let people with experience talk about it. In my case, the employer is sponsoring me. I would say that it's a protracted process to gain DH1B. It takes about 6 months and maybe 10K for your employer to budget. For the green card, listen, I started 2 years ago and I still don't have it. And it's probably a 20K cost for the employer that is hiring you and sponsoring you. What else can I add? I would say in my experience, being out of the H-1B visa and not yet on the green card, it has been very difficult for me to travel internationally. I've not been back to France in almost 3 years now. And my family was not able to visit me until November in the reopening of the border. So this is something to take into account, right? You really have to be committed to the US, your job here, and it might entail some sacrifices that you may or may not be ready to make. I've covered a lot of ground. Maybe I'll pause here.
Thank you, Thomas. It was very, very useful and very interesting. So also the tip to do the degree with the F1 visa, and maybe to find a science and technology sector. And thank you very much. Maybe there will be precise questions for you in the chat. Don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat. Now let's move to Nora. And what is your view, your experience about getting a visa to the US?
Well, I didn't expand earlier on my background because it's very connected to my visa experience. So basically, for anyone here who's either an artist or working on a creative project, the O1, which then leads to a green card, is an option you can consider. So I did start with a J1. As an intern, I was working for Viadeo, which was at the time, I don't even know if it still exists, a LinkedIn competitor. And that's how I got to the US, just as an intern on a J1. But then after I extended that J1 as long as I could and it expired, I had in the meantime started working on a project for a documentary. And that's the film that got me my visa. So it's a documentary on women tech entrepreneurs called She Started It. And I worked on it from, I would say 2013 until it came out in 2016. And then in 2016, when it came out is when I got my O1. And I started immediately the process to upgrade the O1 to an EB1, which is a green card. So I did not know at first that it was a possibility to get an O1. When I was making the film, between my J1's expiration and the moment that I got my O1, I actually moved back to France, but went back and forth to the US every 3 months. So basically you had on an ESTA, you had 3 months to be in the US. So I basically went back and forth as much as I could while making the film. And I got the O1 a couple years into it. So it took a lot of dedication, a lot of flight tickets, a lot of stuff we can talk about privately. But basically, what you need for an O1 is you need to show that you have a creative project that is, and all the requirements can be found online, and I'm happy to talk to you about it separately, but you need to show that your project has press recognition. There's a few criteria. It's less hard than if you're a scientist, for example, where I think you need like a Nobel Prize or something. I don't know, something really crazy. But for creative project, the criteria are, I think, reasonable if your project is getting recognition. So our film went to festivals and got a lot of press and all of that. So that helped a lot. So one advice I have if you're working on a creative project is to really keep track of every opportunity you have to speak on a panel or be a judge or something. You need to showcase your expertise. So that comes through also writing, whether you're, so in my case, I was also working as a journalist for Usine Nouvelle. So I had that, you know, I could show all the articles I had written on the topic. And on the side, I had also all the press we had gotten for the film, and all those things add up. We can go in detail, but the O1 is a big undertaking in terms of the evidence you have to show. So I would recommend going with a lawyer. I know some people who don't, because the lawyer route, I think it cost me about 5K. I think I can check, but some people do it without because they can't afford it, and you can find, again, all the requirements online. What I think the lawyer is really helpful for is writing your, I forget the name, the letter, the main letter, which is kind of making the case for why you are an exceptional, this is really the term. So the lawyer can really do that better than you. Prove that you're an exceptional contributor to the US, which I wouldn't have been able to do by myself. So the lawyer really kind of uses every little piece of evidence to create this story about why you're really adding to the country, why you should stay here. And then the really good thing about the O1, it's, I'm forgetting if it's I'm forgetting the amount of time. I think it's 3 years. But then it's really easy, not easy, but it's something you can turn into a green card, which is why a lot of people really like that visa. So the O1, you basically upgrade it with more proof that your project is going further, that your career is going further. And in our case, that was when the film came out and we went on tour and we got distribution and we got a broadcast deal, and all of that you add to the pile of evidence, and you can turn your O1 into an EB1. So again, I'm happy to talk separately to anyone who wants to, you know, there are a lot of details, but just know that if you're a creative of any kind, it is absolutely doable. I know many other friends who got it, and yeah, it's not impossible. It just, you know, work and money, as everything in the US is. Any questions that I didn't answer, by the way, about that, or?
Thank you, Nora. I think it was very, very interesting also to hear about your story. Maybe we will move to loyal experience, and then if there are questions, Nicolas Dussault wrote me, you can of course start asking questions in the chat. So we'll then answer to your question. Loyal, the floor is yours.
Okay, I went through a J1 visa, and doing it through COVID was a bit complicated because you know, everything got a little bit slower. But thankfully, because I'm Canadian, I didn't have to do the interview at the embassy, so it saved me some shortcuts on that end. But I think in general, I found a placement, and then I started the application process for the J1 with CIE and Parentis. I think they're a partner of Sciences Po, and they were relatively helpful, but there was about 1,200 years or so. And I think that I only scheduled it originally for a few months, and then once I was in the US, I extended it And again, it costs to get like 1,200 euros or something like that. So it's not the cheapest thing in the world, but it's a pretty straightforward process. Like getting the J1 is honestly not that complicated. And I think that the best way to do it is to figure out an employer that wants to have you for a long period of time, so you don't have to do the extension process, because it seems pretty redundant to have to do the extension process because you're spending the same amount of money on something that's really just like kind of a rubber stamp. But I think that if you can actually find an employer that wants you to work there, they're very, very happy to have you. I think that in general, American companies American employers are very, very happy to have international experience brought in. And I mean, that's what I experienced. They were more than happy to have me on for a few months extra without any concerns of how to extend it. But the process can be a bit tedious depending on how you're trying to figure out the paperwork, because I think there was some provisions for French labor law that were really, really confusing, and there was a lot of back and forth emails and trying to figure out how to make it work properly. But other than that, I think in general, though, I think it's a great experience.
Thank you, Laurel. So just to sum up, I think that if you want to go and apply for a visa in the US, do you need to have patience, sacrifice, creativity, expertise, a degree, an American degree might be helpful, and exceptionalism. You should be exceptional just to reach this visa. Okay. Thank you very much. I think there will be questions maybe about this, but let's move to another question I want you to answer us. What are your personal views, your personal impressions about living and working in the US? We have different experiences, since Domitille and Nora, you're based in New York, but Nora, you had also an experience in San Francisco. Loyal, you had an experience in DC, and Thomas, you are now based in Miami. So the United States is a huge country, so I think experiences can be very different. So maybe we will have a last round and then we will have the Q&A session. Domitille.
Yeah, so yes, my experience is in New York. I find that, well, I lived previously in Paris and London, so I can compare a bit, even if it's not always the same. I feel that there is a very good work-life balance in the United States, and that it's very nice to live in New York. But it's nice if you have money, because life is very expensive, even compared to Paris and London. And you also need to be careful and to have a good health insurance, because it can make a big difference. So this is something that another advice that I would give is that you cannot come without a good health insurance, or without being able to afford good private insurance, health insurance, because then you never know what can happen, and you need that. Then I think that networking is quite easy, that meeting people is quite easy, and we are very lucky in the United States to have the Anne Scatolin and the American Sciences Po Foundation, because there is really a very good network of Sciences Po alumni in the United States, and it can be a very good resource for everyone, because we have many events, we have many occasions to meet other people, to network, and to grow your network, and not only in the city where you live, but everywhere in the United States. So I think that's a very good resource that we can all use, and we need to be part of the network, and to bring whatever we can to the alumni, and then you can also be rewarded.
Thank you, Domitille. In fact, I will put the link in the chat. There is the network of alumni in the US is very dynamic and very big. How many alumni are you in the US, Sciences Po alumni in the US?
I can't remember, but something like 2,000. Alexandre, I saw that you're here. I don't know if you can help me on this, but we are a lot, and let's say that we are at least 200 very active members.
Great. So another tip to get the visa and to get to the US, go to the Po Alumni website and meet all the people, all the alumni living in the US. They will.
But that is true everywhere. I would recommend, especially to the young students or graduates, you need to be an alumnus as soon as possible, and you need to be part of the network. You need to, because it's everywhere. I mean, when I was in London, it was the same. In Paris, it was the same. If you're part of the network, you will have many benefits from it. So this is something that you need to be aware of. If you're part of the alumni network, it's going to help you in every side of your career.
I confirm this, Domitille. We are almost everywhere all over the world, so this is very useful. Thank you. Thomas, what is your view about Miami? And you also lived in New York, so maybe you can compare the two cities.
For sure. Before doing that, maybe I see a couple of questions on the chat. I think it's a good opportunity for me to expand on H-1B and on OPT. Let's say you're in France, you have a company that is willing to hire you. How could they do that? H-1B is one route. That's the 6 years visa. The problem you're going to face with that is H-1B has a very inflexible timeline the employer will have to work with. You can only apply once a year for H-1B if rules have not changed. You can only apply in April. So let's say it's January and the company in the US says, yes, I want to hire you. They will only be able to apply for your visa in April. Then you're going to be subject to a lottery because there is a cap on how many people can come to the US under that visa program. If you have a US degree, you are on a lottery, which has a higher percentage of success, but still a lottery, so you might get denied. If you get approved, then you get approved only in November, and that's when you can start working. So finding an employer that is willing to work with such an inflexible timeline can be a challenge, and that is not, plus you have to add the cost of such, back and forth with the administration that the employer will have to bear. So OPT is really a great way for you to get on an H-1B because it's very cheap. I think it's free or very cheap for the employer to hire you after graduation as an employee for a year under OPT. And once they get to know you, they get personal, they need you, then it makes more sense for them to apply for your H-1B in April, get the answer in November. During all that time, you can work and it doesn't really matter. The timeline does not hamper your ability to work for them. So that was just a little bracket for this visa. As per my experience in the US, I was first in New York. I've found the city fascinating. I was in my 20s back then. It's a brilliant city, a lot going on. Living and working in Manhattan was extremely satisfying and kept me very busy. It can start to feel a little bit too much activity and very stressful city. I was happy to move to Miami for as part of development in my career. Miami is a very different environment to live in. First, it's a bilingual city, so knowing Spanish or even Portuguese will help you tremendously. Half of the population, I would say, does not speak English, or at least it's not their primary language. I'm actually working with mostly non-American here in my current job in project finance, and at Burger King, it was also like half of the people who were not American, a lot of internationals and a lot of Latinos representing the demographics here in the area. The one comparison that I would offer with Miami against New York is your living standard in Miami are a lot higher. Real estate prices are, I would say, maybe 50% lower than what you can have in New York for the same price. things are starting to change. Miami is now considered a very dynamic city for the US. A lot of people after the pandemic have moved to Miami. A lot of financial services firms have moved down, bringing with them a lot of employees with purchasing power, which are driving rent and real estate prices for purchase up in a substantial manner. So it's moving. Other cities that are following the same path would be Tampa in Florida or Phoenix in Arizona, where a lot of people have immigrated. But I'm planning on staying here in Miami. The weather is fantastic. We're in February now. It's 83 degrees, which would be like 28, 29 Celsius here. It's more of a suburb type of lifestyle compared to New York, where you can walk everywhere. Sorry, get on the subway. Here, public transportation is usually not an option. You need a car, and this is really your the American way of life that you might have in your head of people with cars and houses and gardens, and this is more of the type of life out here. As maybe per the work-life balance, I've always found it very manageable. I do not have experience in France. I never worked in France, so I wouldn't be able to offer a comparison. But in all my jobs on Wall Street, in New York, or here in Florida, I've found work-life balance to be reasonable. I like the direct approach that people have in a professional setting. I would compare that with what I can hear my friends in France say. The way you respect the hierarchy or you address your colleagues is very different. It's much more direct and business oriented. You do away with all the ornaments and superficiality. Maybe one thing as a development in my life, I'm planning on maybe starting a family soon. And I would say that the US I envision it to be a little bit more difficult than if I were to plan the same in France. I'm thinking of healthcare costs that Domitille has covered, and I agree with her statement. You never really know how much it's going to cost you for X or Y a procedure that you're seeking. And even if you have an insurance, which is extremely costly, and hopefully you get through your employer, otherwise it's maybe $500 to $2 a month if you are to subscribe it on your own. And even if you have an insurance, you might be out of pocket for certain expenses. It's not clear what the insurance will cover, up to what amount, etc. I find it extremely confusing, and it's a big issue in the US. And the second thing would also be you don't have your family support as easily. Maybe you're trying to grow some children, and not having your family around might add on the cost that you need to budget for. Childcare is very expensive, and later as your kids grow up, education is also another big cost component that French people might not be used to. And finally, was Sciences Po useful? Extremely useful for me. In academia, Sciences Po is a big name. I was accepted to Columbia University, partly based on the reputation of Sciences Po, usually called the Harvard of France, or like this kind of terms are being used. So great reception in the academics world. In the professional world, Sciences Po is less well known in my sector of activity. I'm in finance and in investment banking. Maybe Sciences Po is not a name that rings a bell to Americans. But it definitely does to Europeans. I worked at 2 European banks. I worked at Commerzbank, the German bank, and at UBS, the Swiss bank. And there, even in the US, you can imagine you have managers that come from Europe and that will be familiar with the name of Sciences Po. And to build a network in New York, it was extremely useful. The foundation has, the Alumni Foundation has been very active during the years I was in New York. So every month I would come out, meet a lot of people. Some of them are still friends to this day, and I'm in contact with them. So I'm extremely grateful for the work that the foundation has done. I found it amazing to maintain a network of professionals and also friends now in my life. And I can't wait for Sciences Po Miami and Florida to develop in the same way, that in the same level of activity that is in New York.
Excellent, thank you, Thomas. Nora, what are your views about New York, San Francisco?
I don't have a lot to add on the life in the US per se, and Domitille covered New York, but I will say if you're in the creative sphere and if you're a freelancer, it's a very different experience. I don't think there's any work-life balance. As I was trying to describe with the O1 earlier, the US is all about what you produce, what you do, especially if you're in an artistic, field. The O1 process was basically, a pile of what you do and how you can prove that you're doing something worthwhile. And it's like that in the field in general, which is if you're not producing anything, you don't really exist. So I think as a freelancer, again, it's different if you work for a company, if you work for a film company, music company, whatever it is, then you're going to be, you're going to have an employer, and it's very different. But if you're a freelancer, you make your own projects, you have to constantly be putting out content. You have to constantly be, it's an extremely competitive industry. I mean, I don't have to tell you how the film industry works, and everybody knows the power of the film industry in the US. So it's just, you have to be ready to basically not have a work-life balance. And I would argue that's the case for a lot of other jobs in the US. Also, no health insurance, no tax withholding, no anything. Basically, you're on your own. That being said, the reason I came here and the reason I'm still here is because it offers amazing opportunities in the arts. For example, for my film, I was able to fundraise through philanthropic funds, retired venture capitalists, stuff that in France I would never have been able to do, or at the very least was not even aware of. There's a whole different, my entire career now is based on distribution. So I have a podcast called Creative Distribution, and everything about that is something that I don't think could be doable in France, which is the fact that you can use very creative avenues to distribute content, films, books, etc. in the US. So in France, you have to go through the theater system, and you have to raise money through the CNC, and then you have to really go to the French theaters, and all of that is very regulated. And I think it's great for a lot of reasons. I am still, in awe of the French system, because here it's really hard to be on your own. But I will say it does afford you a few more opportunities professionally that I don't think I would have had back home. So it's a trade-off. It's like, if you are healthy, if you are okay with working a lot and not having a lot of protection as a worker, it's okay for a few years while you try, make a film, make an album, write a book, do all those things. I think it's an amazing opportunity. That being said, I don't think I'm going to grow old here unless I become extremely rich. So that's that.
Thank you, Nora, for this very sincere view about life in the US. Loyal, what about DC and your experience there?
Yeah, no, I found DC to be a very, very interesting place, because I think it's a good, I don't know, a comparison would be like Brussels. There's a lot of institutions, like it's just in government institutions and government institutions. I mean, I think that, to be honest, the city is actually quite boring on a cultural sense. Like there's not, there is some kind of music this or food that, but it's not the same kind of thing as New York, where there's just explosion of cultural activity. So I think my experiences with DC is that it's a very interesting city to live in if you're doing government, international affairs, or if you're focused on like what the US is doing domestically. Like it's really the place to be. There's so many opportunities there. It's baffling. if you the second you're on the ground, even if it was online, I mean, there's just constant networking events, and there's so many institutions and places just set up, like think tanks, foundations. It's just baffling. Like, I don't think Europe has anything similar to that. Maybe in the UK, but from my experience where I lived on the continent, there was no city that has that kind of like just concentration of just really, really, really well-paying jobs and just like amazing things that are focused on international affairs, or just, yeah, it's very, very, very institutionally dense. But I found that when I was moving around, like DC was pretty well located. It's really close to like Philadelphia. It's not very far away from other places like New York or all these things. So you can see a lot of really, really, really rich cultural centers just down the road. It's not that far, but I think my experience living in DC in and of itself, like, I mean, it's just mostly museums, institutions, and like really like that's kind of what it is. I mean, after I think I would sometimes finish work at like 6 or 7 o'clock and go like, oh yeah, let's go look at something. And, you know, there's just nothing really open. And I mean, that might've been COVID, but I mean, still like, it didn't feel like the same kind of thing as like, you know, you finish class in Paris at 7 o'clock and, you know, there's tons of cafes and beautiful like nightlife. It seems like everyone in DC is just, oh, I'll go home to my family, because most people living there are bureaucratic government workers, right? So it's I think it's an amazing place to live and work, but I think that depending on what you're looking for, it's very, very, very specific kind of community. But I think in general, though, the Sciences Po community was very, very helpful. I mean, I got I met a person who met a person who knew a person through a Sciences Po staff. So otherwise, I was having a lot of really trouble. And I think they're part of the Sciences Po alumni community because they're very, very well connected. But so I think in that case, actually, the Sciences Po network is fundamental to at least helping you get your foot through the door, depending on the avenue you're coming through. I think especially with the J1 process, I think like it's extremely valuable to reach out through the Sciences Po network. I think it's extremely, extremely helpful. The work-life balance, I think, I'm from Canada. We have similar problems with work-life balance. I think you have to work quite a bit, but I think that's not inherently a problem if you're, you know, younger and full of steam. I think once you start getting a little bit older, you might be like, oh yeah, European like 35-hour, 38-hour work week is actually not that bad. So, you know, I think as your priorities change, going back to Europe might seem more appealing. But I think the US has an amazing labor market, and I think if you're there with high value added skills, lots of energy and lots of ambition, you can go there and make like very good salaries, and there's literally unlimited opportunities. Like it's really something that I can't stress enough. If you sign up for even a couple like newsletters where you get like job postings in this, there's so many. Like the US is just baffling. Like it's really something that's quite remarkable. But I think that, yeah, spending a longer term time there, I wouldn't want to live there past like 38, 40, because after that, you know, you start being like, wow, like I want kids, you know, you want a family. And it's like, it's harder to set that up structurally in a country like the US, because everything is just, it's privatized, right? So, you know, you've got to have a huge salary, or your company will pay for it, or just go back to the country where you have other citizenship and, you know, like use the benefits of citizenship there, right? That's kind of like how I see the US. It's just an amazing place to accelerate your career very quickly.
Thank you for your enthusiasm, Lloyd. I saw a question in the chat. For those of you who work for a French company in the US, can being an expat in America help getting a visa later? Domitille answered. I don't know if you, Domitille, you want to.
Yeah, so it won't help. It won't change anything, because if you come with a visa that your employer gives you, or for which the employer is going to sponsor you, then you're tied to your employer. So you're not allowed to work for any other company. It's only when you have a green card that you're allowed to work for another company. So it won't really help, the fact that you already hold a visa. So because the visa is really tied to your company. So you need a green card to be able to work and change companies. And yeah, if you don't have the green card, then you need, every time you change company, you need a new visa. So you will need probably to leave the country and to get a visa to go back. If you're from France, you need to go back to the American embassy in Paris, do all the paperwork again, wait for your visa to come, and then you will be allowed to go back to the United States.
Thank you, Domitille. I think it was useful to know about all this back and forth process. We have a question in the chat about being having a European Center career from Samuel Dab. I will be moving to New York around September on an L2 visa. How do you value when applying for jobs for a US employer a professional and academic background that is very European centered? Loyal maybe has.
I was just typing a response, and I was going to say that I think if you have experience with a French energy regulator, probably what, like, yeah, I don't know. I think in general, a lot of that experience is can help. But my suggestion was going to be that, yeah, try to find a European energy company that's active in the US market, and where you can actually help them with, or an American market that wants to get active in the European market, right? Because then you have, there's lots of American energy companies that might want to be active in the European market and vice versa. So I think that in that case, you'd either be looking at companies that want to expand their operations within Europe and they need more insight into European regulations. But this, again, depends on the city you're based in. So I think that'd be more specific. And if you're in an international city like New York or DC, I think that European background would be quite helpful. But I think if you're going to, you know, somewhere like Austin, Texas, like there's a cultural center, there's might not be as much there. But this is, again, just really depends on where you're going.
Thank you, Laurel. There is another question about visa from Eloise. Maybe Nora, you can answer publicly. So.
I mean, maybe someone has a more recent answer. For me, back in the day, the ESTA was valid for at least 2 years, I think. So someone can jump in for now. But so I didn't have to renew it for about 2 years. I went back and forth with the same ESTA. I still had to obviously enter customs, but the ESTA was valid for, I think it was 2 years. And I did a lot of back and forth for those 2 years. So maybe someone can fact check the time now that it's valid for.
Any other questions? We have 5 minutes left for our webinar. ESTA is valid for more than a year at least, but you can't stay for more than 90 days at a time.
Yeah, so it's very important to leave before the 90 days. And there are a lot of ways to do that. Just, keep track of time.
There is a question from Marion Romeas. Hello, I have a question about the G1 visa for internship in the US. Is there any way to get a visa without a sponsor? This is a good question.
I don't think so. I feel, and it's getting more and more difficult to get visas. So if you don't have a sponsor or an internship that is already organized and settled, you will not be able to get a visa.
Okay, thank you for your franchise, we say in French. Could you stay for, oh, well, I'm lost in the chat. There are too many questions and answers. Eloise asked if you can stay for 2.5 months several times a year in the States. I don't know if anyone will answer.
Probably, but under an ESTA, you can't work. So, I mean, unless you're retired and want a vacation multiple times in the US, it's going to be difficult to make it sustainable.
We hear you quite badly, Thomas.
Yeah, you can't work. What he was saying is you can't work. So when you're going back and forth, and that's what I did for a couple of years, you have to be, you have to figure out why it is that you're spending that much time in the US, because you're not allowed to work on an ESTA. So in my case, we can talk about it separately, but I was employed by someone in France. So I was not working in the US in the sense I was not paid by anyone in the US, but I was making a film. So there are a lot of gray areas, but I was actually injecting money into the US by hiring people, but it's still a gray area. So those things you have to be really careful about. And you have to have a story also every time you come back, because they do ask you, why are you here? Even though you were here 3 weeks ago. So, but we can talk about it offline.
Thank you, Nora. There is a question from Ocean. I think maybe Domitille could answer, since it is a matter of a spouse visa, J2 spouse visa, or if it's possible to get a new visa, a separate independent visa.
Well, I'm not sure about the J2 visa. I've not checked if they fall under the new requirements that came in November. So I just need to check. If they do, then you don't need a work authorization. You don't need a EAD anymore. I think it was most of the visas, but I don't know all the letters, and I'm not familiar with all of them. But if not, you will not be allowed to work until it's renewed. And if that's the issue, that the fact that it's only for 1 year, and you need to apply for it when only 180 days before it expires. So you will probably have a lot of holes, a lot of periods when, as I did, you will not be able to work. So my first advice would be to check if your J2 falls under the new rules or not. And if not, maybe you can check if your spouse can change the visa, because sometimes just it happens all the time. I mean, I know a lot of people who changed from H1 to L1, or from J something, or you can change. So maybe it can be interesting that your spouse changes his visa so that you're allowed to work. But that would be my advice. You should just go to the USIS webpage and check what's the new rule for the J2 visa.
Yes, hi Domitille, and sorry, Gamia, I might jump in. And hello everyone. So yes, I'm a new resident in the US. I arrived just last summer, so 6 months ago with my husband, and there are the new rules that are applying to us. So as a spouse here, I felt really a little bit desperate, like in the TV dramas. It's not very easy at all. So yes, I need a work authorization to work, and I got it. But the issue is, like, I got it like last winter after several months waiting, and then it's already going to expire in several months. So the things, like, I'm interviewing for some job, especially in the cultural domains, because I'm really interested in museums and cultural institutions. And the things, like you all said, that is very time and money consuming for employers to sponsor someone. So are they willing to employ someone like me, who has a visa that is going to expire in some months, or is it easier for them to sponsor me for another type of visa if I already had a work authorization in the past in the US? So that's my first question. And my second question is, like, if you lose your work-based visa and a member of your family is still working in the US, can you kind of go back to the spouse one, or it's finished and they will send you to France or somewhere else?
Should I answer? Or? Yeah. So so yes, you can go back to your husband's to your spouse visa as much as you need to do it or wish to do it. So that's not an issue. Regarding the first question, unfortunately, my experience and the experience of many people around me is that usually, if a company has a choice to hire someone with a work authorization linked to a derivative visa, or to hire someone who can work, they will not bother hiring you, even if they prefer you and so on, because it's too complicated for them. They don't know for how long you'll be able to work. They don't know if your work authorization is going to be renewed or not, when it's going to be renewed. So it's a real issue when you're looking for a job. And the company, few companies are going to sponsor you, because if you came as a J2 visa and then you're asking for another visa, it can lead to issues with USIS, because USIS is going to say that you're probably a delinquent, that you came under a false reason, and so it can take longer, and for the company it's going to be a lot of paperwork, a lot of hassle. So it, in my experience, and it's not only based on my own experience, but on what I've heard from other people, and it's a real issue. So I don't know what to tell you. What I would recommend is that you're trying to renew your work authorization as early as possible, so that you will have as few holes as possible. Because sometimes it happens that sometimes you have the work authorization as a new one before the first one expires. So it can happen. It did happen a few years ago before COVID struck. So it can happen again. So you just have to be very vigilant, and but then you also have to be aware that you can have some periods when you're not allowed to work.
Thank you, Domitille. Thank you.
Thank you, Domitille. Thank you all our panelists. I don't know if there are a last comment from our fantastic speakers. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Domitille. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Loyal. I put in the chat the Sciences Po Alumni website to follow our activities. And see you next time in Senegal with the next episode of Living and Working in Senegal. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.